The morning I was supposed to fly to Alaska, I saw her for the first time. 4:30 a.m., mile marker 7, standing in the dark like she'd been planted there. She was crying, but she wasn't making any sound. Just standing there with her hand pressed flat against a wooden post like she was trying to feel something solid. I had a one-way ticket in my jacket pocket. A bag already in my truck. Nothing left in Nashville worth staying for. And I still couldn't make myself run past her. Let me back up. My name is James Holt. I'm 38 years old. I did 2 tours in Afghanistan with the Marine Corps, came home in one piece, which is more than I can say for some of the men I served with. Now I fix cars for a living at a shop on Dickerson Pike in East Nashville. I'm good at it. Engines make sense to me in a way that most things stopped making sense about 18 months ago. That's when Diane died. Her name was Diane Holt, and she was the kind of woman who remembered the names of every single person she met. Cashiers, mail carriers, the guy who mowed our lawn every third Saturday. She'd ask about their kids, their dogs, their bad knees. She collected people the way some women collect jewelry, except what she collected was actually worth something. We met at a 4th of July cookout in Germantown when I was 29, and she walked up to me with 2 beers and said, "You look like you're trying to memorize the exit routes." "Marine," I said. "How'd you know?" She said. "My dad did 3 tours in Vietnam. You all make the same face at parties." She handed me a beer and sat down next to me on the porch steps, and we talked for 4 hours straight while the fireworks went off behind us. I married her 11 months later. Breast cancer took her in 8 weeks. 8 weeks from diagnosis to gone. The oncologist, a soft-spoken man named Dr. Garrett at Vanderbilt University Medical Center, sat across from us in his office and explained that the cancer had metastasized, which meant it had spread beyond the original tumor to her lymph nodes and liver. He used words like aggressive and limited options and quality of life. Diane held my hand the entire time. Her hand was steady. Mine was shaking so hard she had to grip it with both of hers. "Stop," she said to me in the parking garage afterward when my legs gave out and I had to put my hand against the concrete wall to stay upright. "James, look at me." I looked at her. Her eyes were red but dry. "We're not going to fall apart in a parking garage," she said. "That's not how we're doing this." "Diane." "I mean it. Get it together, Marine." Her voice cracked on the last word and she pressed her lips together hard. "I need you steady. Can you do that for me?" I nodded even though every cell in my body was screaming. She was gone 54 days later. After Diane, I stopped sleeping. Not the way people say they can't sleep when they mean they toss and turn for an hour. I mean, I would lie in our bed staring at the ceiling until 3, 4, 5 in the morning and then get up and drive to work 2 hours before the shop opened and sit in the parking lot drinking gas station coffee until someone else showed up. I picked up every extra shift. I volunteered for every job nobody else wanted. I worked until my hands were so sore I couldn't close them into fists. Running was Diane's idea, technically. She ran every morning at 4:30 same time for 11 years out the front door before the sun was up. After she died, I couldn't sleep anyway, so one morning at 4:28 I laced up a pair of old sneakers and went outside just to have somewhere to put my body. I ran the route she used to run without thinking about it. My feet just knew where she'd gone. Mile marker 7 was where she always turned around. There's a wooden post there at the edge of the lake path painted green, and Diane used to touch it every time she passed like a ritual. I didn't know why until I found her journal. But that's later. I ran to mile marker 7 every morning for 18 months, and I never saw another soul out there at 4:30 a.m. It felt right, honestly. Like that stretch of path belonged to her and by extension to me and nobody else needed to be there, and then I bought the ticket to Alaska. I want to be clear about something. I was not trying to hurt myself. I know how it sounds, one-way ticket, nothing worth staying for, but it wasn't like that. I just needed to go somewhere that had no memory of Diane in it. Nashville had her everywhere. The cookout in Germantown where we met. The hospital on Medical Center Drive. The porch steps where she used to sit with her coffee. The front door where her running shoes were still sitting because I could not make myself move them. I needed to be somewhere empty. Alaska felt empty enough. I had the bag packed. I had the Uber scheduled. I had told exactly nobody because there was nobody left to tell. And then at 4:29 a.m. on a Tuesday in October, I ran around the bend in the lake path and there was a woman standing at mile marker 7 in the dark, pressing both hands flat against that green post, her whole body shaking with crying she was trying to keep inside. Like she was holding a door shut against something massive trying to break through. My chest tightened so hard I stopped running mid-stride. I stood there on the path and watched her for 30 seconds, and something moved in my ribcage that hadn't moved in 18 months. Not attraction, not anything romantic, just recognition. The bone-deep, gut-level recognition of someone else who was barely keeping the door shut. I turned around. I ran home. I sat at the kitchen table until 6 a.m. Then I picked up my phone and canceled the Uber. Then I canceled the flight. I unpacked my bag and put everything back where it belonged. I made a pot of coffee. I sat with Diane's running shoes by the front door, and I said out loud to nobody, "Okay, one more day." The next morning I was back at mile marker 7 at 4:30 a.m. She was already there, and the morning after that, and the one after that. I didn't approach her, didn't wave, didn't do any of the things a normal functioning human being might do when they see the same person in the same spot at 4:30 in the morning 3 days running. I just kept my distance and ran my route and tried not to make it obvious that I was paying attention. I was absolutely paying attention. She ran like she was late for something. That was the first thing I noticed. Not the easy, rhythmic stride of someone who runs for pleasure. She ran like she was being chased or like she was trying to outrun something that kept pace no matter how fast she went. Her shoulders were up around her ears. Her jaw was tight. Even from 50 yards back, I could see the tension in her whole body coiled and locked down. She never wore earbuds. I noticed that on day 4. Every other runner on that path had headphones and music, going podcast, whatever people use to get out of their own heads. Not her. She ran in total silence, which told me she wasn't trying to get out of her head. She was staying in it on purpose, sitting with whatever was in there. I understood that completely. On day 6, I saw her pull the paper out. It was tucked into the front pocket of her running jacket, and she took it out at mile marker 7 the way someone reaches for a photograph they've looked at 10,000 times automatic, like breathing. She unfolded it once, looked at it for maybe 4 seconds, then folded it back up and pressed it against her sternum with both hands. Her chin dropped. Her shoulders caved forward. And she made a sound I felt more than heard low, and broken, the kind of sound that comes from somewhere below the throat. My own throat closed up so fast I had to stop running. I stood on the path with my hands on my knees and breathed through it and told myself it was none of my business. She didn't know me. I didn't know her. People were allowed to grieve privately on public running paths at 4:30 in the morning without some stranger inserting himself into it. I kept my distance, but I stayed until she left. Every morning. Day 9 changed things. It had rained overnight, and the path was slick. That particular kind of wet leaf slippery that looks harmless and isn't. I saw it happening before it happened, the way her left foot came down at the wrong angle on a patch of wet oak leaves just past the bend before mile marker 7. Her ankle rolled, her arms went out, and she was going down hard onto the asphalt. I was moving before I made a decision to move. 18 months out of the Marines, and my body still remembered how to close distance fast. I covered the gap between us in about 4 seconds and got both arms under hers before she hit the ground, taking the impact on my forearms instead of her palms. We ended up in a half crouch on the path, her back against my chest, both of us breathing hard. She twisted around fast, eyes wide, and shoved back from me like I'd grabbed her instead of caught her. "Whoa!" I held both hands up. I was just behind you on the path. You slipped." She stared at me. Her chest was heaving. Up close in the thin gray pre-dawn light, I could see that her eyes were brown and red-rimmed and exhausted in the specific way of someone who hadn't slept a full night in a long time. "You caught me," she said. Her voice was rough, like she hadn't used it much recently. "Wet leaves," I said. "Happens every October. The bend right before 7 is the worst spot." She looked down at her hands, both scraped raw at the palms where she'd instinctively reached out anyway. A thin line of blood was beating up across her left palm. She stared at it like she wasn't sure what to do with it. "Here." I pulled the hem of my shirt up and tore a strip off the bottom without thinking about it. Field medicine habit. Diane used to roll her eyes at me for it. She said I treated every minor injury like a combat situation. The woman blinked at the strip of fabric in my hand. You tore your shirt." "It's an old shirt. That's not really the point. Your hand is bleeding." She looked at her palm again. Then she held it out. I wrapped the fabric around it twice and tied it off, not too tight the way you do when you don't have proper supplies and you're working with what you've got. "James," I said when I was done. "My name's James." She pulled her hand back slowly and looked at the makeshift bandage. Something moved across her face, not a smile exactly, but the shadow of one, the ghost of a reflex she hadn't used in a while. "Sophie," she said. Just the one word, just her name. But the way she said it, like she was checking to make sure it still fit, hit me somewhere behind the sternum that I hadn't expected. "You okay to run?" I asked. "Ankle feel all right?" She tested her weight on it, carefully shifting side to side. "It's fine." She glanced up at me, then quickly away. "Thank you. Thank you." She started back up the path. I watched her go, that same tense-driven stride, shoulders back up around her ears. "Sophie." The word came out before I'd decided to say it. She stopped, but didn't turn all the way around, just angled her head slightly, waiting. "The leaves are the same on the way back," I said. "Watch your step at the bend." A pause. Then she turned enough that I could see her profile, and this time the shadow of a smile made it all the way to the surface for just a half second. "I will," she said. She ran. I watched until she was out of sight. Then I looked down at my torn shirt and thought about the fact that it had been 423 days since I'd said my own name out loud to another person. I'd said it so automatically just now, like it was nothing, like introducing yourself to a stranger was still something I knew how to do. Diane would have laughed at the shirt. She would have said, "James, you cannot keep doing that. We go through 4 shirts a month because of you." And then she would have kissed me and called me ridiculous. I pressed my hand flat against mile marker 7 on my way back. It was still warm from Sophie's hands. I found the wallet on a Sunday, not because I was looking for it. I'd been living around Diane's things for 18 months, the way you live around a piece of furniture that's too heavy to move carefully, with a kind of practiced avoidance. Her reading glasses on the nightstand, her half-finished crossword on the kitchen counter, her running shoes by the front door. I didn't touch any of it. I didn't throw any of it away. I just routed my life around the edges of her absence, like water finding a way around a stone. The wallet was in the drawer of her nightstand. I opened the drawer looking for a pen, and there it was. Small brown leather, worn soft at the corners. I stood there with my hand on it for a full minute before I picked it up. "Okay," I said out loud, to her, to the room, to nobody. "Okay." I sat on the edge of the bed and opened it. Credit cards I'd already canceled. Her library card. A coffee punch card with 8 out of 10 boxes stamped. She never did get that free coffee. A folded receipt from a hardware store dated 3 weeks before she died for birdseed and a new hummingbird feeder she never got to hang. I pressed my thumb against that receipt until my hand stopped shaking enough to keep going. Then I found the photograph. It was tucked behind her library card, small enough that I almost missed it. A snapshot, the kind you print at a pharmacy, slightly faded at the edges. 2 people standing in front of what looked like a community center. A young woman in a yellow dress and a young man in his Marine Corps dress blues, both of them squinting into the sun and grinning so wide it looked like it hurt. I recognized the dress blues immediately. You don't forget what that uniform looks like. 2 tours in Afghanistan, and the sight of it still hit me somewhere below the ribs. The young man couldn't have been more than 21, 22. Fresh-faced. The kind of young that makes you feel old just looking at it. His arm was around the young woman's shoulders, and she was leaning into him with the easy comfort of someone who'd been leaning on that particular person her whole life. I turned the photo over. Diane's handwriting on the back in her small, neat print, Danny's graduation. Sophie, plus Danny Brennan. May 2019. My chest locked up so hard I couldn't breathe for a moment. Sophie. I looked at the young woman in the yellow dress. Looked at her long enough that the photograph started to shake in my hands, and I realized my hands were the ones doing the shaking. It was her. The woman from mile marker 7. Younger in the photo lighter, somehow the particular lightness of someone who hasn't lost the thing yet that will change them forever. But it was absolutely her. I set the photo down on the bed next to me and put my face in my hands. "Diane." My voice came out wrecked. "What did you do?" Because here's what I knew about my wife: she did not keep photographs by accident. Diane curated everything in her life with quiet, deliberate intention. Her bookshelves organized by color and then by theme, her spice rack alphabetized every card she'd ever received, filed by year in a shoebox under the bed. A photograph tucked behind her library card meant that photograph was important. Meant she looked at it regularly. Meant she was keeping it close for a reason. I picked the photo back up. looked at the young man in his dress blues again. Danny Brennan. 21 years old in this picture. 2 years later he would be in Kandahar, Afghanistan, and then he wouldn't be anywhere at all, and his sister would be standing alone in the dark at mile marker 7, pressing a letter from the Department of Defense against her chest like a wound she couldn't stop. I knew Kandahar. I'd spent 7 months there on my second tour. I knew the dust and the heat and the particular quality of silence that settles over a place right before everything goes wrong. I knew what it cost to come home from there. I knew even more what it cost not to. "Did you know him?" I asked the empty room. "Did you know Danny?" Diane couldn't answer, but the photograph in my hand felt like something close to one. I thought about going to mile marker 7 right then, finding Sophie, showing her the photo, saying what your brother knew. I think my wife has been trying to tell me something from whatever comes after death. I think the reason I canceled my flight to Alaska might have something to do with a photograph in a dead woman's wallet. I put the photo on Diane's nightstand instead, next to her reading glasses, next to her half-finished crossword. I sat with it until 2 in the morning. Then I said out loud to my wife, who wasn't there and somehow also was, "I'm not going to say anything yet, but I'm not going to disappear either. Is that okay? Is that what you're asking me?" The house was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet than it had been for 18 months. Less like an absence, more like a held breath. I went to bed. I actually slept not well, not long, but I slept. And at 4:15 a.m. I laced up my shoes and went out into the cold Nashville dark and ran to mile marker 7. Sophie was already there, her hand pressed flat against the post, her breath making small clouds in the October air. I ran past her at my usual pace, gave her space, gave her the morning. But before I turned back for home, I stopped at the post and put my own hand on it right where hers had been. "I know who you are," I said, quiet enough that she couldn't hear me. "I just don't know yet what I'm supposed to do about it." The rain started on a Wednesday. Not the gentle kind, the cold sideways kind that comes off the Cumberland River and soaks through a jacket in 90 seconds. I stood at the front door at 4:15 a.m., hand on the knob, watching water sheet down the porch steps. Then I thought about Sophie standing at mile marker 7 alone in this. I went out. She was already there when I came around the bend, hood up, water streaming down her face like she'd stopped noticing it an hour ago. She turned when she heard my footsteps. "You actually came out in this," she said. "I come out every morning," I said. "It's pouring James." I noticed. Something shifted in her expression, not quite a smile, but the bones of one trying to form underneath. "I didn't think anyone else was that stubborn," she said. "Marines," I said. "Professionally stubborn." The word landed on her face like a stone hitting water. She turned back to the post, her hand coming up to press flat against the wet wood. Her shoulders pulled inward. "My brother was a Marine," she said quietly. I kept my voice steady. "Yeah." "Danny?" His name dropped out of her like something she'd been holding at arm's length. "He was 22, deployed to Afghanistan in January 2021, Kandahar province." She stopped, drew a breath that shook all the way down. "He was killed in May, 3 months before they pulled everyone out." My chest locked. 7 months in Kandahar on my second tour. I knew every ridgeline, every road, the exact color of the dust at dawn. The letter said classified mission. Her voice fractured. "Killed in action during a classified mission. They couldn't tell me where exactly. Couldn't tell me how. I got a flag and a casualty assistance officer who kept saying he served with honor." A sound came out of her, sharp and broken. "Like that's supposed to fill the space where my brother used to be." "Sophie." "And then August came." The tears broke through completely, cutting down her rain-soaked face. "I watched them load onto the planes on TV. I watched everyone come home, and I kept thinking Danny didn't make it to that plane. He died 3 months before that plane, and I still don't know how or where or—" She couldn't finish. A sound tore out of her that I felt behind my sternum, 3 years of unanswered questions compressed into one raw moment. I stepped forward and put both arms around her. She went rigid for half a second. Then something gave way entirely. Her hands grabbed the front of my soaked jacket and she bent forward into my chest and sobbed hard, heaving waves of grief she'd been swallowing for God knows how long. Her whole body shook with it. I held on. Didn't say it was okay. Didn't say he was in a better place. Just kept my arms steady and let her shake and let the rain come down around both of us. When the shaking slowed, she pulled back and looked up at me. Her face was completely wrecked, swollen eyes, trembling chin, the look of someone who just fell apart in front of a near stranger and isn't sure yet how to feel about it. "I don't usually do that," she said, voice destroyed. "Don't apologize," I said. "Everyone always jumps in with something helpful." She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth. "I don't need helpful. I just need to say his name out loud without someone trying to fix it." "Danny," I said. Her chin crumpled. Fresh tears spilled over. "Danny Brennan," I said. 22 years old. Kandahar Province, May 2021. I held her gaze steady. "I was there, Sophie. Second tour 2016 to 2017. I know what those mountains look like at sunrise. I know that ground." She stared at me. "You were really there?" "Yeah." "So you're not just—" Her voice broke again, but she pushed through it. "You actually know, you're not just saying words." "I never just say words." She looked at me for a long moment in the pouring rainwater running down both our faces, neither of us moving toward shelter. "Why do you come here?" she asked. "Mile marker 7 specifically. Why this spot?" My hand found the post beside us. "My wife used to run this route. She turned around at this post every single morning, touched it every time like a ritual." My throat tightened. "She's been gone 18 months. Sophie closed her eyes. When she opened them, the look on her face wasn't pity. It was recognition, bone deep, the kind you can't fake. "So you come here because she did," she said. "I come here because it's the only place that still feels like she's somewhere," I said. The truth of it surprised me on the way out. I hadn't known that's what it was until I heard myself say it. Sophie reached out and placed her hand over mine on the post. Ice-cold fingers, soaking wet, trembling slightly against my knuckles. "Me too," she said. "That's exactly why I come here too." The rain kept falling. The lake disappeared into the dark around us. Two people holding onto the same wooden post in the middle of a Nashville rainstorm, neither one willing to be the first to let go. I got home at 6:15 that morning and stood in the entryway for a long time staring at Diane's running shoes. They were exactly where she'd left them, right side of the door toes, pointing out the laces still loosely knotted the way she always kept them so she could slip them on fast in the dark without waking me. Pink and gray New Balance worn through at the outer heel on both sides because she always landed the same way, 18 years of the same stride, wearing the same groove into every pair of shoes she owned. 18 months. I had stepped over and around those shoes 470-some mornings and I had not touched them once. I sat down on the floor next to them. Just sat down right there on the entryway tile with my back against the wall, soaking wet from the rain, and looked at them. "I held somebody today," I said out loud. "In the rain. She was falling apart and I held her." The shoes didn't answer. Diane would have. She would have said something like, "Well, good. That's what arms are for, James." And then she would have pulled me up off the floor and made me change out of my wet clothes before I caught pneumonia because Diane had zero patience for what she called performative suffering, which included but was not limited to sitting on cold floors, skipping meals, and refusing to sleep in the actual bed. I missed her so much in that moment that it felt like a physical thing, like something had reached into my chest and closed a fist around whatever was beating in there. "I found your wallet," I said. "I found the photograph." I pulled it out of my jacket pocket. I'd been carrying it since Sunday. Sophie and Danny at the community center squinting into the sun. Danny in his dress blues. Sophie in her yellow dress, both of them grinning like the world was still the size of that parking lot. "You kept this for a reason," I said. "I know you did. You don't keep things without reasons." I turned the photo over. Diane's handwriting, Danny's graduation, Sophie and Danny Brennan, May 2019. 2 years after this picture, Danny Brennan would be in Kandahar. 7 months after that, he'd be gone. And Diane would have known his sister, would have sat with her somehow in whatever way Diane sat with people who were breaking, which was quietly and completely and without making them feel like a burden. That was the thing about my wife that I couldn't explain to people who hadn't seen it. She didn't help people loudly. She didn't organize fundraisers or give speeches or show up with casseroles and expectations. She just appeared, sat down next to whoever was struggling and stayed there until they didn't need her to anymore. She called it just being furniture. Useful, she said, but not intrusive. I thought about Sophie's face when she said everyone always jumps in with something helpful. Diane would never have jumped in. Diane would have known better. I got up off the floor and went to the bedroom and pulled the shoebox out from under the bed, the one I hadn't opened since the week after the funeral. Inside, under the get-well cards that came too late, and the memorial service program, and the discharge papers from Vanderbilt was the journal. Small, brown cover. Diane's name written on the inside front page in her own hand. She'd started it during the second round of chemo. The oncology nurses had suggested journaling as a way to process. Diane had looked at the pamphlet they gave her, looked at me and said dryly, "I'm not a journaling person, James. I'm an action person." But she'd done it anyway, because when Diane decided something was worth doing, she did it regardless of whether it came naturally. I had never opened it. I sat on the edge of the bed and held it in both hands. It was lighter than I expected, maybe 80-90 pages, not all of them filled. The edges of some pages were slightly wavy, the way paper gets when someone's been writing with wet hands or when tears have fallen on it and dried. My throat closed completely. "I'm not ready," I said, out loud to her to the room. "I know that's not what you want to hear, but I'm not ready for what's in here yet." I held it a minute longer. Then I did what I always did. I put it back in the shoebox, put the shoebox under the bed and stood up. But this time I did something different. I went back to the entryway. I crouched down in front of Diane's running shoes. I picked them up, both of them, one in each hand, and I carried them to the bedroom closet and set them on the floor next to my own shoes. Not thrown away, not gone, just moved inside, out of the doorway, off the threshold. My hands were shaking when I straightened up. "I'm not ready for the journal," I said, "but I can do that much. Okay, is that okay?" The closet was quiet. The house was quiet. But something in the air felt different, the way a room feels after someone's just left it versus the way it feels when no one's been there in years. I went to bed. I pulled the covers up. I lay in the dark and thought about Sophie's ice-cold hand pressing over mine on that post in the rain, and the way she'd said me too, like the words had been waiting a long time to come out. I thought about Danny Brennan in his dress blues grinning into the sun. I thought about Diane keeping that photograph for a reason. I fell asleep before I could think about any of it too hard. And when I woke up at 4:15 the next morning, the first thing I reached for was the journal. I didn't open it, but I put it in my jacket pocket before I went out the door. The journal had been in my jacket pocket for 11 mornings when it fell out. Not dramatically. Not the way things fall in movies, slow and inevitable with the camera tracking it down. It just slipped out when I unzipped my pocket at mile marker 7 to check my phone and dropped onto the frost-covered ground between us with a flat, quiet sound that somehow stopped everything. Sophie looked down at it, then up at me. "Sorry." I bent to pick it up, but her hand got there first. She held it for just a second, long enough to see the cover. The worn brown leather, the way the edges had softened from being carried every day. She turned it over once. Then she held it out to me with both hands carefully, the way you return something you understand is fragile. "Diane's?" she asked. My throat tightened. "Yeah. You carry it with you. Every morning, 11 days now." I pushed it back into my pocket. "I haven't opened it." Sophie stared at me. Her breath made small clouds in the cold air. 11 days and you haven't—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "Why not?" "Because I don't know what's in there." My voice came out rougher than I intended. "And once I know, I can't unknow it. And right now—" I stopped, started again. "Right now I still get to imagine she wrote something that makes all of this make sense. The second I open it, either it does or it doesn't. And I'm not ready for it not to." Sophie was quiet for a moment. The lake was still in the cold morning air, gray and flat as sheet metal. "I have one of those," she said finally. I looked at her. She reached into her own jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper so creased and refolded that the paper had gone white at every seam, soft as cloth from handling. She held it in both hands without unfolding it, looking down at it like it was both the most precious and most dangerous thing she owned. "The letter," I said. "The letter." She ran her thumb along one of the white creases. "Department of Defense. Official notification of death in action." Her voice stayed flat and controlled the voice of someone who'd said these words enough times that the syllables had worn smooth. I've read it so many times I have it memorized, but I still carry it, every single morning. She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. Danny used to say I was the kind of person who kept every birthday card anyone ever gave me. He said it like it was a flaw. A sound escaped her half laugh, half something that hurt. He wasn't wrong. "It's not a flaw," I said. "No." She folded the letter back up along its worn creases, slow and precise. It's the last piece of paper that has anything to do with him. Official, I mean. Anything with his name on it and a date." Her chin trembled. "May 14th, 2021. That's the last date that has Danny in it. And if I stop carrying this—" Her voice cracked completely, and she pressed the letter hard against her sternum, both hands flat over it. "It feels like I'm saying that date doesn't matter anymore, like I'm agreeing that he just stopped. Sophie." My chest was so tight I could barely get the words out. "That date matters. It will always matter. You don't know that." Her eyes filled. "People forget, James. People move on and they forget, and one day you mention his name and they do this thing with their face." She demonstrated a brief, polite blankness, the social performance of remembrance without actual memory. "And you realize they forgot what he looked like. They forgot he existed. And you're standing there holding this letter because it's the only thing left that proves he was real." Something broke open in me then. Not slowly, all at once. "He was real," I said. My voice came out low and fierce. "Sophie, listen to me. I was in Kandahar. I walked that ground. And the men who served there, the ones who didn't come home, they are not forgotten. Not by anyone who was there. Not ever." She stared at me, tears streaming freely now, cutting down her cold, flushed cheeks. "Danny was 22 years old," I said. "He put on that uniform because he believed it meant something. And it did. It does. No piece of paper and no fading memory changes that. He was there. He was real. And you carrying that letter every morning isn't you being broken, Sophie. It's you refusing to let the world shrink him down to a date." A sob tore out of her so suddenly that she pressed both hands over her mouth, the letter crushed between her palms and her lips. Her shoulders shook violently. Then she dropped her hands and looked at me with eyes so raw and open I had to work to hold her gaze. "Nobody has ever said it like that," she whispered. "In 3 years, nobody has ever—" She stopped, took a breath that shuddered all the way down. "Thank you, James. Thank you." I reached out and put my hand over the fist she'd made around the letter. Her knuckles were ice cold and trembling. "Don't thank me," I said. "Just don't stop carrying it. Not until you're ready, and maybe not even then." She looked down at our hands. Then she turned her fist over and opened it, and the letter lay in her palm between us, worn and creased and real. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yeah. The journal." She glanced at my jacket pocket. "When you open it," she corrected herself. "If you open it, will you tell me what she wrote?" My heart did something complicated in my chest. "Yeah," I said. "I think I will." She closed her fingers back around the letter. The sun was starting to come up over the tree line, pale gold cutting across the frost on the path. "Same time tomorrow," she said. "Same time tomorrow," I said. She almost smiled. Not the shadow of one this time. The real thing, brief and tired and genuine, breaking across her face like that pale gold light breaking over the lake. She ran. I watched her go. Then I pulled the journal out of my pocket and held it in both hands in the early morning light and thought about opening it right there and then. I didn't, but my thumb found the cover and stayed there the whole run home. I opened the journal on a Thursday morning, not at mile marker 7, not with Sophie next to me, alone at the kitchen table at 3:45 a.m., because I woke up in the dark and knew the way you sometimes just know things, that today was the day, that I'd been carrying it long enough. I made coffee. I set the journal on the table. I sat down and opened it. The first page was just her name, Diane Catherine Holt. Underneath the date, September 3rd, 2022, 6 weeks after diagnosis, 3 weeks before she died. I turned to the first entry. They gave me a journal today. Becky from the oncology floor said it would help to write things down. I told her I'm not a writer. She said nobody is until they have to be. I think that's the most honest thing anyone said to me in 6 weeks. I laughed out loud alone in my kitchen at 3:45 in the morning, because that was so completely Diane that it felt like she'd just walked into the room and sat down across from me. I kept reading. Most of it was what I expected: her thoughts on the chemo. The nurses, she liked her opinions on the hospital food, which were extensive and completely unsparing. Notes about things she wanted to tell me but couldn't find the right moment for. A whole page about the hummingbird feeder she'd bought and never hung, and how she needed me to put it up in April because the ruby-throated hummingbirds came through Nashville in spring, and she didn't want them arriving to find nothing waiting. I was crying by the second page. Not the quiet kind. The kind that comes up from somewhere foundational and doesn't ask permission, that makes your whole face hurt and your chest ache like something structural has shifted inside it. The kind I hadn't let myself do in 18 months because there had always been another shift to pick up another engine to pull apart another way to stay moving, so I didn't have to feel the ground under my feet. I let it happen. I sat at that kitchen table and sobbed for my wife until I was hollowed out completely. Then I picked the journal back up and kept reading. 30 pages in, I found Sophie's name. October 14th. Met a young woman today in the family resource room. Sophie Brennan, 31, elementary school teacher. Her brother Danny is a Marine deployed to Afghanistan. She comes in Tuesdays and Thursdays to video call him when he's available. She has a laugh that fills a room and then immediately apologizes for it like someone told her too many times she takes up too much space. I sat with her 2 hours today. I'm going to sit with her again. My hand started shaking so hard the page rattled against my fingers. I turned to the next entry about Sophie. October 28th, Sophie again. She showed me a photo Danny sent him and 3 other Marines outside their base, all of them grinning like idiots into the sun. She said, "He always makes that face in photos. Dad used to call it his doofus grin." Then she laughed. Then she cried. Then she laughed again. I think those two things have started blurring together for her. I know something about that lately. I pressed my fist hard against my mouth. She asked about James today. I don't know why I told her so much. I told her about Afghanistan, about the way he goes quiet in crowds, about how he fixes things when he's scared engines anything broken, because fixing things is the only language he has for I don't know what to do. She listened like someone who recognized it. I think she understands men who carry things quietly. She's been doing it herself her whole life. "Diane," my voice came out completely wrecked. "You knew. You already knew all of it." I turned pages with hands that wouldn't steady until I found the last entry. October 31st, 2022. 3 days before she died. I'm tired in a way that doesn't have a word for it. But I need to write this down because I need it to exist somewhere outside my head. James is going to try to disappear after I'm gone. He'll work until there's nothing left and call it strength. It won't be strength. It'll just be emptiness with better posture. He'll keep my running shoes by the door because moving them means admitting I'm not coming back. My chest caved. I put both palms flat on the table and breathed through it. Sophie is going to need someone too. She doesn't know it yet because Danny is still alive, but I have a feeling, the kind I've learned to trust these past weeks, that she's going to find her way to that lake path. People in pain find water. I can't explain it. They just do. Mile marker 7. That's where I always turned around. Where I felt most like myself, right at the edge of the lake where the path bends and the water opens up. If James is anywhere, he'll be there. I can't make any of this happen, but I can write it down. And maybe that's its own kind of prayer. Take care of each other, that's all I'm asking. Just please take care of each other. I closed the journal. I sat at that table until 4:30. Then I put the journal in my jacket pocket, laced up my shoes, and ran. Sophie was already at mile marker 7. The second she saw my face, completely wrecked, red-eyed, not even trying to hold it together, she crossed the distance between us in 3 steps and grabbed both my arms. "James, what happened?" "I opened it," I said. "The journal." Her breath caught sharp. "And—" I pulled it from my pocket and held it out. My hand wouldn't stop shaking. "She knew you, Sophie." My voice broke on every word. "Diane knew you. She wrote about you. She wrote about Danny. She wrote about this path, about mile marker 7. I met her eyes. She knew. She knew all of it before any of it happened. Sophie took the journal from my trembling hands. She looked down at it, her own hands shaking now, tears already cutting down her face. "She knew," Sophie whispered. "She knew," I said. Sophie read the journal standing up. She didn't sit down, didn't lean against the post, just stood in the early morning cold with the journal open in both hands and read, her breath making uneven clouds in the air, her face doing things I'd never seen it do before. Surprise, recognition, grief. Something that wasn't quite either of those things but lived in the territory between them. I stood back and gave her room, watched the lake, tried not to watch her. I failed at the second part. When she got to the October 14th entry, the first one with her name in it, her hand flew up and covered her mouth. A sound came out from behind her fingers, high and broken like something small being crushed. "She wrote about me," Sophie said, not to me, to herself, to the air, to Diane maybe. "Yeah," I said quietly. "She remembered my laugh." Her voice cracked completely. "She said I apologize for my laugh. How did she—" She pressed both hands over her face, the journal held against her chest now, and her shoulders heaved once, twice, 3 times. Then she pulled her hands down and kept reading with tears streaming freely, not bothering to wipe them. When she got to the last entry, her legs actually buckled. Not all the way, she caught herself against the post with one hand, but her knees went, and I stepped forward fast with both hands out. "I've got you," I said. "I'm fine." But she wasn't. Her whole body was shaking. She straightened up and kept reading, one hand gripping the post, the other holding the journal open. Her lips were moving slightly on the last lines, reading Diane's words to herself like a prayer. "Take care of each other. That's all I'm asking. Just please take care of each other." Sophie closed the journal. She held it against her chest with both arms wrapped around it and tipped her head back and looked up at the pale morning sky and let out a long, shattered breath. "She was dying," Sophie said. "She was dying, and she was worried about you, and she was worried about me, and she sat there and she wrote it all down like she could just—" Her voice broke. "Like she could just arrange things from the other side." "That was Diane," I said. My throat was so tight the words barely made it through. "She couldn't fix it, so she planned around it. She was always planning around the things she couldn't fix." Sophie lowered her head and looked at me. Her eyes were devastated and wide open and completely direct. "James," she said, "how long have you known who I am?" The question landed like I'd been expecting it for weeks, because I had been. "The photograph in Diane's wallet," I said. "I found it 6 days after I first saw you at this post. You and Danny at his graduation." I held her gaze. I owed her that much. "I've known since week 2. Something moved across her face. Not anger, something more complicated than anger. She looked down at the journal in her arms, then back up at me. "Week 2, she said carefully. That's a long time to know something and not say it." "I know." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because Diane kept your photograph." My voice came out low and unsteady. "She kept it behind her library card where she'd see it every time she opened her wallet. And I thought if she loved you enough to keep you that close, then the least I could do was just be here, without making it about what I knew, without making it weird or heavy before you were ready for it to be either of those things." Sophie stared at me for a long moment. The lake was turning gold behind her as the sun broke the tree line. "That's either the most considerate thing anyone's ever done for me," she said slowly, "or the strangest." "Probably both," I said. Something shifted in her face, then, the devastation still there, but something else moving underneath it, something warmer and more dangerous. "She wrote that you fix things when you're scared," Sophie said. "She wasn't wrong. She wrote that it's your language for I don't know what to do. Also not wrong. Are you scared right now?" I looked at her standing at mile marker 7 in the early gold light with Diane's journal held against her chest and tears drying on her face and Danny's letter in her pocket and 3 years of grief in her eyes and somehow still standing. "Yeah," I said. "I'm terrified." "Me too." She held the journal out to me. I took it. Our fingers overlapped on the cover for a moment and neither of us pulled back. "She wrote about this spot," Sophie said softly. "Mile marker 7. She called it where she felt most like herself." "I know. Danny and I used to fish about 30 yards up the bank from here when we were kids." Her voice went gentle and wrecked on his name. "Saturday mornings. He'd wake me up at 5 a.m. and I'd complain the whole drive over, and then we'd sit there for 3 hours and catch nothing, and I'd be furious about it and he'd just laugh." She looked at the post, then at the lake. "I didn't even realize this was the same spot until about a month after I started coming here, and then I realized and I just—" She pressed her lips together. "I couldn't leave. My chest ached so deeply I didn't have words for it." "Diane was here," I said. "Danny was here." "Yeah." Sophie reached out and put her hand flat against the post. "They were both here before us." I reached out and put my hand next to hers on the post, our fingers almost touching, the wood cold and solid and permanent under our palms. "So were we," I said. "We just didn't know it yet." Sophie looked at our hands on the post. Then she looked at me. And for the first time since I'd known her, the grief in her eyes didn't have the last word. Something else did something careful and new and terrifying in the best possible way. "Same time tomorrow," she said. "Same time tomorrow," I said. The first morning Sophie brought coffee, I almost didn't know what to do with it. She was already at mile marker 7 when I came around the bend, 2 cups from the frothy monkey on 12th Avenue, steam rising in the cold air. She held one out without making it a thing. Black, she said. I figured. I stopped running, looked at the cup, looked at her. How'd you know? You're a veteran who works on engines and wakes up before 4 a.m. by choice. She raised an eyebrow. Nobody like that puts cream in anything. I took the cup. The warmth moved through my hands and up my arms in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature of the coffee. Thank you, I said. Don't mention it. She wrapped both hands around her own cup. I figured if we're going to stand here freezing every morning, we might as well be caffeinated while we do it. We stood at mile marker 7 and drank our coffee while Nashville woke up around us, first birds in the tree line, the sky going from black to deep blue. A delivery truck rumbling somewhere above the park. Ordinary sounds. The sounds of a city continuing. I hadn't noticed a city continuing in a long time. Things shifted after that. Not dramatically, not the way things shift in movies. Just quietly, the way a season changes. You don't notice it happening, and then one morning you look up and the light is different and something that was bare has started putting out leaves. I started sleeping. Actually sleeping, not lying in the dark waiting for 4 a.m., but going under 5 hours, 6 hours. I woke up one morning having dreamed about something other than Diane for the first time in 18 months. I lay there feeling guilty about it for 10 minutes. Then I got up and went running. Sophie was at the post with coffee. You look like you actually slept, she said, studying my face with the directness of a teacher who can tell in 2 seconds whether something's true. 6 hours, I said. Her face broke into a smile so sudden it startled me. James, that's really good. Don't make it weird, I said. I'm not making it weird, I'm being happy for you. She pressed the coffee into my hands. 6 hours, that's good. The warmth in her voice did something to my chest I didn't examine too closely. At the shop, my coworker, Pete, a man from Murfreesboro who had worked on cars for 30 years and communicated primarily through grunts, looked up from a transmission one afternoon and said, You seem different. Different how? He considered this. Less dead, he said, and went back to work. I took that as a win. Sophie and I started texting. Small things, she'd send photos of things her third graders said, and I'd send pictures of inexplicable objects I found in people's engines. A wedding ring, 3 golf balls, an intact bird's nest built inside a 2019 Chevy Silverado that had sat unused in a garage for 2 years. That bird raised a family in there, she texted. You can't just evict them. I relocated the nest, I texted back. To the tree next to the shop. A pause. Then Diane was right about you. What did she say? Read the October 21st entry. 3rd paragraph. I went home that night and opened the journal. James would relocate a spider rather than kill it and then spend 20 minutes pretending he didn't. He's the most quietly gentle person I've ever known, and he has absolutely no idea. I sat on the edge of the bed and read it 3 times. Then I closed the journal and put it on the nightstand, not in the shoebox under the bed. On the nightstand where I could reach it. Diane's reading glasses were still there. I picked them up, held them a moment, set them back down next to the journal. She told Sophie about the spider thing, I said out loud. I could almost hear Diane laughing. The night Sophie came for dinner was a Tuesday in December. She stood in my kitchen doorway in a green sweater and looked around the tools on the counter, the hummingbird feeder I'd finally hung outside the window, and didn't tiptoe around any of it. Didn't treat the space like a museum. Something smells good, she said. Chili, I said. It's the only thing I make that qualifies as actual food. Danny used to make chili. She came in and hoisted herself up onto the counter, legs dangling completely at ease. He'd put so much cayenne in it your eyes would water just standing near the pot. Then he'd taste it and say it needed more. She shook her head, laughing and wincing simultaneously. Genuinely inedible. I ate 3 bowls every single time. I laughed, a real one coming up from somewhere I'd forgotten about. What? She said. Nothing. I stirred the chili. I just like hearing about him, the way you talk about Danny. Sophie went quiet. When I looked over, she was watching me with an expression I didn't have a name for yet, careful and open and frightened in a way that had nothing to do with fear of me specifically, and everything to do with what happened the last time she let herself feel safe somewhere. James, she said softly. Yeah, her hands twisted together in her lap. I haven't liked being anywhere in 3 years, she said. Not my apartment, not school, nowhere. She swallowed hard. But I like being here. My hand went still on the spoon. I like you being here too, I said. She looked at me. I looked at her. Outside the kitchen window, the hummingbird feeder swayed in the December wind, empty, patient, waiting for April. Same time tomorrow, she said finally, her voice soft. Same time tomorrow, I said. She smiled. Not the careful one she used when she was protecting herself. The real one, wide and tired and completely unguarded, the smile of someone who has decided against all reasonable evidence to trust that the ground is going to hold. The hummingbirds came back in April. I was at the kitchen sink washing coffee cups when the first one appeared at the feeder outside the window, a ruby-throated male, impossibly small, hovering with that particular frantic stillness that hummingbirds have wings moving so fast they disappeared. He stayed for about 40 seconds. Then he was gone. I stood at the sink with wet hands and said, I hung it, Diane, like you asked. Sophie was sitting at the kitchen table behind me, grading papers, red pen moving. She looked up. Did it come? She said. Yeah, I said. It came. She set down her pen, came to stand next to me at the window. We watched the feeder together in the morning light, both of us waiting in case it came back. Neither of us saying anything because some moments don't need words laid over them. It came back twice more before we left for the lake path. We got married on a Saturday morning in October, a year to the month from the morning I'd almost flown to Alaska and seen a woman crying at mile marker 7 instead. No church, no reception hall, no 100 people in formal wear watching us say words we'd rehearsed. Just the two of us and Pete from the shop who cried, which he will deny to his dying day, and Sophie's friend Carolyn from school who served as our witness and brought homemade biscuits because she said no ceremony should happen on an empty stomach. We did it at mile marker 7, 4:30 a.m., the stars still out the lake, black and still beside us. Sophie wore Danny's bracelet on her left wrist, a simple cord bracelet he'd worn through both months of training mailed home to her the week before he deployed with a note that said something to bring back. He hadn't brought it back. She carried it for him. I wore Diane's wedding ring on a chain around my neck the way I had since the day she died. The officiant, a kind woman named Reverend Graves from a small church on Gallatin Pike who had agreed without hesitation to marry two people at a lake path at 4:30 in the morning, looked at us both and said, "Are you ready?" Sophie looked at me. Her eyes were bright and terrified and completely certain all at once. "I've been ready since week 2, she said. I laughed so hard I had to press my fist against my mouth. Pete made a sound behind us that he would later describe as clearing his throat. "Yeah," I said when I could talk again. "I'm ready." We said the words. Simple ones, we'd written them ourselves, sitting at my kitchen table on a Wednesday night with the journal open between us and Danny's photograph propped against the salt shaker. We didn't try to be poetic. We just said what was true. I said, "I was disappearing when I found you. You gave me a reason to stay visible." Sophie's chin trembled. She pressed her lips together hard and held on. She said, "You caught me before I hit the ground. I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you know that was the best thing that ever happened to me." Reverend Graves pronounced us married just as the first pale light started breaking over the tree line, turning the lake from black to silver. Pete cleared his throat again approximately 4 more times. Carolyn was openly weeping into a biscuit. I put both hands on Sophie's face and she grabbed my wrists and held on, and we stayed like that for a moment, just breathing. Just present, just two people at mile marker 7 at 4:30 in the morning in the middle of their whole lives. "Hey," she whispered. "Hey," I said. "We did it. We did it." That was 8 months ago. We still run every morning. Same route, same time, same car. Sophie still runs like she's late for something, shoulders up, jaw set, that driven stride that I used to read as grief and now understand is just how she moves through the world. Fast and forward and completely committed. She beats me to mile marker 7 most mornings. I don't mind. Diane's journal lives on the nightstand. I've read it so many times the spine has softened. Sophie reads it too. Sometimes she'll pick it up in the evenings and sit with it the way you sit with a letter from someone you love, taking your time, not rushing toward the end. She says it helps her feel like she knew her. I think she did know her in the way that matters, not long but deep. Danny's photograph is on the wall in the hallway. Him and his doofus grin, squinting into the sun in his dress blues. Some mornings I stop in front of it on my way out the door and I say, "Morning, Danny." It started as something I did without thinking and became something I do on purpose. Sophie heard me do it once. She stood in the hallway doorway in her running jacket and watched me for a moment, and then she said very quietly, "He would have liked you." "Yeah," I said. "Yeah." She zipped up her jacket. "He liked people who fix things." This morning we ran in the dark the way we always do. Cold air, bare trees, the lake flat and silver in the pre-dawn light. Sophie was ahead of me around the last bench. She always takes that corner fast, and when I came around she was already at the post, both hands pressed flat against the wood head, bowed. I slowed to a walk, came up beside her. "You okay?" I said, breathing hard. She lifted her head. Her eyes were wet, but she was smiling, the real one, the wide, unguarded one that still startles me sometimes with how much light it carries. "Yeah," she said. "I was just talking to them." "What did you say?" She thought about it for a moment. Then she reached over and took my hand, lacing her fingers through mine, both our hands resting against the post. "I said thank you," she said. The sun broke the tree line. Gold light poured across the lake, across the path, across the two of us standing at mile marker 7 with our hands on a wooden post in the early morning cold. I thought about a one-way ticket to Alaska sitting in my jacket pocket. I thought about a woman crying in the dark who wasn't making any sound. I thought about Diane at this kitchen table writing, "Take care of each other," with hands that were running out of time. I tightened my fingers around Sophie's. "Same time tomorrow," I said. She leaned her head against my shoulder. "Always," she said. "Some people come into your life like a closed door, solid, final, done. And then someone sits down next to you on the worst morning of your life and the door opens again. Not because they forced it, just because they stayed. Grief doesn't end. I want to be honest about that. Diane is still on my nightstand. Danny is still on my wall. Some mornings the weight of missing them is so heavy I have to stop mid-run and just breathe through it. Sophie does too. We don't hide that from each other. We just keep running. That's the thing nobody tells you about loss. It doesn't go away. It goes with you. And if you're lucky, if you don't disappear completely before it happens, someone comes along who carries their own, and you find out that two people holding their grief together is different from one person holding it alone. Mile marker 7 is still there. We'll be there tomorrow at 4:30 a.m. If someone showed up for you when you'd already decided nobody would, a stranger, a friend, anyone who refused to let you vanish, tell me about it in the comments. I read every single one. And if you're on your own worst morning right now, stay. Just one more day. You never know who's about to come around the bend.